I am so pleased that Karen Sweeney, Senior Vice President of Turner Construction Company, has agreed to lead the conversation panel. So please join me in welcoming Karen Sweeney to the stage.
Thank you, Chase, for that introduction, and thank you all for being here. I'm very pleased and delighted to have this panel with us tonight that represent the best of industry, university, and academic partnerships. And we're going to forego the long introductions and the bios. If you would like to read more about their impressive bios, please make sure to go to the National Building Museum website, and under the Turner Prize event, you'll find each of their bios. So I don't want to take a lot of time because we only have 45 minutes for what I hope will be an extraordinary, I'm sure will be an extraordinary conversation. So I don't want to take a lot of time with that. But what I would like to do is do a short introduction from each of you. Just take a minute or two and tell us who you are and who you represent tonight. And then maybe some tidbit, some little bit of information that maybe you wouldn't see in the bio. For example, it was noted that I am a Penn State grad. Well, I am a proud Penn State AE grad, class of 1980 in construction management. And I have our two children are also Penn State grads. My son just graduated in May in civil engineering, and I had the opportunity and honor to be on stage in Chimay. I think we were sitting next to each other then at commencement, and when he showed up on stage, I was able to give him a hug, and how many parents get to do that on graduation commencement night? So I'm just thrilled to be here and to moderate this panel. So Chimay, let's start with you.
Right, I'm Chimay Anumba, Head of Architectural Engineering at Penn State. I'm coming to the end of my 7th year as department head. It's amazing how time flies when you're having fun. I'm also proud to say my daughter is a freshman at Penn State this year in engineering. She chose not to be in AE. She's thinking biomedical. And I'm looking forward to seeing how she evolves over the period.
Good evening, everyone. I'm John Grady. I'm the president of PIDC, which is the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation. PIDC is Philadelphia's public-private development corporation. For the last nearly 60 years, we have worked in Philadelphia to attract investment, drive business growth, and encourage developments of all sorts, large and small, throughout the city and its various neighborhoods. I've had the pleasure for the last decade or so in working very closely with lots of folks at Penn State, a number of whom are here tonight, to really begin the process of bringing them to Philadelphia and building partnerships in the city, some of which you saw in the video at the Navy Yard with David's GridStar project. The little known fact about me is I have no connection to Penn State. But I do have a nephew who's a senior high school football player who would love for the Penn State coach to call him and offer him a scholarship. So if you happen to know anybody, let me know afterwards at the reception.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Martha Kanter. I'm a visiting professor at New York University. I just finished last night teaching the politics of higher education. And I'm very excited to be here because I spent the last 5 years before coming to NYU as your Undersecretary of Education. And in that, I got a wonderful opportunity to learn about Penn State, to work in science and technology, engineering and mathematics programs with the National Science Foundation, to architect quite a lot of competitions, actually award quite a lot of money. And I'm just thrilled to be here tonight. I was watching the video and I was thinking back, you asked for sort of one tidbit, and I'm that old, but we were the first, I was a community college president for 16 years, and we built the first environmental center on a community college campus that was a LEEDs Platinum building. So, and that was many years ago. So it's exciting to see the innovation from Penn State and the kind of leadership we always, having run a community college for many years, having been a faculty member, we always looked to the universities for what was the next big thing. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm just really delighted. Thank you.
Good evening. I guess that's why I have this. My name is Ted Lynch. I'm the CEO of Southland Industries. We're a national engineering, construction, and service firm specializing in building MEP systems. I am also a proud alumnus of Penn State AE program, both undergraduate and a PhD. Little known fact is that I was roommates of the previous speaker up here, David Riley, and another professor, John Mesner. Another fact is I've got 3 kids and none of them are college age, but I am brainwashing them to be future Penn State.
That's good, Ted. You have to start early and often. Martha, let's start with you. From an educational broader perspective and your experience as Undersecretary of Education and relating to the President's goal of having the best educated, most competitive workforce in the world by 2020, why was that so critical, and your involvement in that? What strategies did you employ to try to set the path for that to happen?
Well, when President Obama came into office in the spring of that year, that first year, he talked about the fact that we were 16th in the world in comparison to other countries. This is from OECD information. We were first in the world a generation ago. And we had lost our way in terms of having the most highly educated people coming out of our colleges and universities. And so when you look at the age of people, 25 to 34-year-olds, and you looked at where we had declined to 16th. So he set a goal, which we always have called, and even to this day now, having left government about a year ago, we called it the North Star, and we said that the universities, in partnership with high schools and the community colleges, have simply got to provide a better quality education to all students. We have 7,000 institutions in the country, and we need to get back to first in the world. And we're in a global competition, frankly. And we're turning graduates like you saw here tonight. I was so proud of the students, and looking at the posters that they had done and all of those projects and what they mean to Philadelphia and the state of Pennsylvania and the country, frankly, to look to the models of what faculty and students can do together and say we have got to get graduates at that level across this country. So that was part of why we set a goal, and I think it'll be a continuing goal no matter what administration comes into office. If you've been a college president, you've worked with all kinds of administrations over many years, and we need to have the competition to have a workforce that, number one, is going to innovate, be creative, when they were looking at the fields they were discovering, and number two, become the leaders that will help us compete globally.
Sure. Thank you. Chimay, let's drill that down to the Penn State AE program and the collaboration with the Navy Yard. Why is an AE education so important to the future, not only of the Pennsylvania region and Philadelphia, but also to the nation and even the global perspective on that? And how does the student involvement in the research projects that you're doing there really help to foster that?
Yeah, one of the things that comes out from an AE program, and a lot of people don't actually realize this, is how multidisciplinary this is. We, in my view, produce the engineers that have the most breadth in terms of understanding of a whole lot of different aspects. And when you then take that into context with the Penn State philosophy of producing world-class engineers, it really becomes really important that we not only teach the technical aspect, but also a whole range of other things. And so with architectural engineering at Penn State, we're always looking to find ways to be ahead of the curve, ahead of all the other programs, and that is one of the great things about Penn State. Also, we try to do that in a number of ways. For example, when I meet with faculty, we are not just talking about who's going to teach the next class in the next semester. We are constantly talking about what are the qualities we want to see in architectural engineers in the next 5 years. And then we need to then start to work back from that to what courses should we be putting on in the next year or two to prepare for that caliber of graduate. And so we're also exposing them to partnerships with industry, such as at the Navy Yard. We're getting them, as you saw in the video, to get their hands dirty. It's not just theory, it's practice. We're also exposing them to global concepts and experiences. For example, we now have 2 study abroad programs, one in Rome and one in China. And the students come out of that incredibly excited and energized about not just opportunities in Pennsylvania, in the United States, but also understand the global context within which they have to work. And I think that's incredibly empowering for a lot of students, some of whom have actually never really left these shores, to be able to do that. But I think the skills that we're able to instill in the students are incredibly important for enabling them to make a difference wherever they go. And it's really about positioning themselves to make a difference. And we have a number of people out here in the audience who actually are the vanguard of the profession and are making a big difference.
Yes, and for many years.
Yes.
But we talk about this, collaboration and this work, but it really takes work and effort to make those collaborations work and work well. So, John, I'd like to ask you, what were some of the challenges? There were the opportunities, but what were some of the challenges in establishing this collaboration and this relationship with Penn State? And what are some of the successes that you're seeing as a result of this partnership?
I think there are a lot of challenges. The opportunity with Penn State in Philadelphia came out of a larger challenge, which was we had a naval shipyard that had been in productive use for 125 years, building and repairing ships. And when the federal government stepped back from that enterprise and essentially over about a 10-year period conveyed the shipyard and its 1,000 acres to the city for reuse, we were kind of left with this challenge of how do we make this place a productive place for the city and the region. And in a lot of ways, a daunting challenge, a challenge we might not have accepted if we had an alternative. And so we started to think about how do we create something that maybe replicates a city. 1,000 acres in a city like Philadelphia is a large, large mass of land. So we started to think about how do we make this a place of work? How do we build on the assets that are here, the people, the facilities, the history? And how do we make it a place of work that is modern and sustainable in all ways, economically, environmentally? And as we thought about that, there were a couple of really, we thought, key building blocks that had to be put in place. We needed partnerships with industry to come into the Navy Yard, to invest, to grow businesses, and to employ and generate activity. We needed partnerships with government to really focus particularly around infrastructure and making sure that the place itself could accept investment. And then very early on, we thought about a role for academia to play a partnership role in...
Day one, we start to get the first-year students out to our career fair, talking to industry. They start to get comfortable right from that very first day, first year, and start to understand that there's a whole world out there. And I think that's really critical. In terms of the partnership with the Navy Yard, I think we're very appreciative of PIDC's role, because also they had the vision of what the possibilities were with that campus. And so we needed to come up with programs that mesh with their vision, but also mesh with Penn State's vision of creating a living lab for engineering and having an engineering extension, so to speak, in Philadelphia. And I think that whole partnership kind of worked. It also was great to have the government end of it, and not just the federal. We did get a lot of the funding from the federal government, but we also had a lot of support from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, as well as from the mayor. So all through the various levels of government, we had a lot of support. In terms of what we could have done better, I think at some point the initiative was seen as too regional. We probably could have done a whole lot better in communicating that this was really a national center of excellence and kind of try to project a bit more of that onto the national scene. But I think it's probably a whole lot easier to do now that there are greater outputs and recognitions for some of the work being done at the Navy. It's difficult to say you're a center of excellence right at the outset when you don't really have a whole lot to show for it. But now we are projecting the Navy Yard work and partnerships as a center of excellence, and people really need to look at having all of those critical ingredients to replicate this sort of effort.
Yeah. And in the industry itself, you know, Ted and I, we've talked about PACE and how that has evolved in the construction industry being part of the working with the faculty and Penn State students. But then there's also candle for lighting and ASHRAE for mechanical. I mean, Ted, can you envision any kind of umbrella organization that we as an industry could participate in so that we get the well-roundedness that we're looking for in students?
Yeah, absolutely. And Chimay and I have talked about it. We started up PACE, Dave Riley, John Mester, myself, Victor Sanvito. We started.
Is that why you were roommates?
Well, we have to be grad students, cheaper to live together, I guess. We had another guy that lived with us, Kirby, and he somehow figured out a way to buy a house. And anyway, it's a long story. The PACE, the original intent was we felt that there could be more collaboration between the university and the companies that came in to hire students, and PACE stands for Partnership for Achieving Construction Excellence. And the intent was great, and they came in, there was 2 events a year. The companies would come in once a year and talk about research topics. Students would get those and then go work on them, and then they come back in the springtime and present the results back to the companies. I think it was a great idea, and it's still going on today, and I think it's still a great program. I think it could use a little more energy, but I think the thing that's lacking, I should say, the great thing about a Penn State AE is their breadth of knowledge, their multidisciplinary knowledge, and I think this was specifically focused on construction students, and I think it's a missed opportunity. Again, we should be involving the other disciplines and involving in that program. It's just I think it's a way to reinvigorate and get some more people there, get the consulting engineers, get architects there, get more owners there, and I think it could be more. So, yeah, and again, Chimay and I have talked about it. I think there could be a bigger, more inclusive program. But PACE was a great start, and I think it's a good model.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to make sure that we have enough time for some of the questions that you may have out there in the audience. We have some people walking around with microphones, and we have probably about, I'd like to take 10-15 minutes to allow your questions while we have these fantastic panelists in front of us to ask some questions. Does anybody have a question at this point? All you Penn State AEs out there, you have to have a question. I know when I went there, and innovation was they concreted the floor in Engineering Unit A, so when you went down to the basement to shine the light on your passive solar house, you didn't have to walk on a dirt floor. Now, there's certainly some innovations that have happened in that time frame.
I just wanted to make a comment. I think the challenges that everybody talked about are spot on, and I think one of the things we see as we try to kind of build these partnerships is that collaboration, if it's going to be meaningful, really requires almost a different business model, right, for the university. So the universities are very used to being organized into departments, and they're used to being organized into certain schedules. And there's not a lot of incentive built into that traditional system for people to step out of one department and join with another department, or never mind another institution. And I think as we consider ideas about how we can do more, thinking about creating the proper incentives in that business model for the university to really encourage and reward that kind of collaboration is important. Because I do think that the academic world, from an outsider's perspective, the academic world is a very rigid bureaucratic business model. And it takes exceptional effort, like what you've seen from Penn State at the Navy Yard, to overcome that. And I think that as particularly people that are in higher education, as you think about opportunities to do more of this and to do it meaningfully, it really does require some thought about how do you create those incentives in the system. And academia works on a certain incentive system around things like tenure and promotion and publishing. And I think as we think about multidisciplinary approaches, particularly in the kind of university like Penn State's, we probably need to think about different kinds of rewards so that there is motivation and that there's an opportunity for it to happen more naturally.
And you were so spot on with that, John. And I think with the new dean coming into the College of Engineering, I've seen a huge difference in his outreach to industry, wanting ideas. The strategic plan that they are putting together, they ask for industry input. And he also said to all the departments, you will all work together. 11 departments will be under the umbrella of the College of Engineering. Chimay, maybe you could expand on this a little bit, because this is, I think, new and innovative to the whole College of Engineering. It's such a great point.
Yeah, no, we've had to share our strategic plans with every other department, and then we've tried to work out synergies in order to develop the college model and plan. And so that sort of interaction is great because, again, it's breaking down the silos and getting people to see what others are thinking, and then trying to bring together what are the common threads and how can we join up and have greater impact. So that's great and exciting to see.
Stronger together, right?
Exactly.
I told Anthony that you could have a coup, right? Your new provost is a former engineering faculty member at Johns Hopkins, so he's
civil engineering. Yeah.
So as you really think about different approaches, you have lots of people in different parts of the university now that have support for those kinds of things.
Yeah, I talked to him actually about some of the Hopkins grads that we hired in our Maryland office. So yeah, very. I think you have a lot in Rob Pangborn, who is also engineering. So there's a lot of energy around that. Do we have any questions? No questions. There's one back there.
Anthony, all right.
There were no other hands, so I thought I would take a shot. So speaking of working together and breaking down barriers, one of the initiatives we're doing in the College of Engineering is what we call frontier faculty hires. And these are college-level searches, not department-controlled searches. So one of the things we're looking for are faculty who we can bring in to address the frontiers of various areas. So in your opinions, what are the frontiers? Ted, you talked about the need for research, and Karen, you agreed to it. What are the frontiers in this industry that we should be looking for to attract people in?
I think, Martha, we talked about apprenticeships and mentoring. Do you see that as a frontier that we haven't explored yet in the education?
Yeah, I don't think, I'll just use a different example. We have 1 million veterans coming back to the U.S. between now and 2020. And a lot of them were 18 to, 21, 22-year-olds. And to bring those people back, and a lot of them, I know Penn State is serving more veterans now than ever. And when you think about, how does someone who's been in a very different experience come into the university? How do they find their way to the AE program as an example? And what are going to be, back to your point, what are going to be the incentives to actually, decide this is for me, this is right? It's going to be a mentor. It's going to be the opportunity to earn while you learn. 2/3 of college students today, unlike when some of us went to college, are working at least half-time while they go to college. So can we ask the universities to make those experiences relevant and tied to the curriculum? Because that's where the innovation and the discovery happens. And so I think, the idea is how would Southland kind of architect that with a university or with several universities and several companies so that students could get a broad understanding of things that they want that are available to them. I think the other thing we haven't done a great job with is introducing students as early as possible to the range of jobs. You know, you're going to have to people to run the buildings. You know, you need a sustainability coordinator. You need an energy management technician. You need a senior scientist. So you need the full range. And students hopefully will get the idea, ultimately, this is sort of my dream, that they will be learning throughout their lifetime and they will be changing jobs over a lifetime. And you want to give them that breadth as early as we can.
I think a lot of that too reaches, I mean, I think this notion particularly around education and workforce, right, reaches back to the elementary school levels. And I think some of the things we've been paying attention to in Philadelphia around our public schools is what kind of changes do we need to make in technical education to prepare kids who maybe are not going to go through a four-year college to become productive in society from a work perspective. And I've seen some things in New York. SAP just announced a venture with the New York City Public Schools and I believe City College maybe, to create a 6-year high school program that at the end of the 6 years, this is a public high school, kids will go to school as, you know, paid for by the taxpayers. At the end of 6 years, they will have an associate's degree in an applied engineering field. So combining a mix of science, engineering, and math. And they will have their high school degree and an associate's degree by the time they're 19 years old. Those kinds of approaches to, and bringing the community college system into that, bringing the universities into that, bringing private industry into that, to me, those are the, I think workforce and education is clearly a frontier that is not ready to keep up with everything else. And seeing more of those opportunities, I think, are critical.
We talk a lot about engineers and the professional jobs out there, but I think one thing that's really hitting our industry is on the trade side, the technical, the trades people. There's a major shortage, and if not now, as work continues to ramp up, the economy gets better, we're seeing major issues with having a qualified technical workforce, people, tradesmen in the field. And I think today, kids are kind of brainwashed and geared towards you have to go get a college education, and I think that's a great thing, but it's not right for every person, and there's a real need for technical tradespeople, and it's a great profession for someone who likes to work with their hands and likes to manage people, get their hands dirty. It's just a...
advancing a research agenda, an agenda around innovation, around entrepreneurship, and around trying to connect government and industry in a way that could propel things forward. And in Philadelphia, we're blessed with many institutions of higher education. Education and medicine are a significant part of our economy in Philadelphia. But when we looked at this opportunity, we thought that there was maybe something missing, and that we immediately started to think about what was missing was a real practical practice around engineering. And we didn't really know what that meant. We knew that our city was really strong in life sciences and pharmaceuticals and research and commercialization in those areas. We, quite frankly, were not as strong in engineering science. And that led us to a discussion literally where we went to Penn State, met with a group of folks at Penn State, and just talked about this vision we had for this place at the Navy Yard, the opportunity we thought there could be. And I think that it's interesting because if you're familiar at all with Philadelphia and with Pennsylvania, Penn State sits kind of physically in the center of the state, and Philadelphia sits on the eastern edge of the state, the southeast. And Philadelphia's a city of 1.5 million people. We're a relatively large metropolitan area, and Penn State had no presence really in Philadelphia at all. No physical presence, no academic presence. There was a small agricultural extension that I think was required by law. But there was no real expression of Penn State's land grant mission or its resources. And I think Penn State really warmed to this challenge quickly, particularly in the College of Engineering, particularly with the architectural engineering program, to really think about how engineering could be a difference maker in this new economy that was going to evolve. And quite frankly, we tried lots of different ideas. I think particularly trying to build around engineering and buildings, around power. The Navy Yard, one of the things David mentioned, I think, in his presentation was that the Navy Yard is a dedicated sort of unregulated electric grid that we own and operate on our own. That presented a great opportunity for research and technology deployment and new business practices. And it created this opening for Penn State to come into Philadelphia. And I think the reason that made it really successful was that Penn State was entrepreneurial. They were willing to invest. They were willing to spend the time and the effort to identify opportunities. But I think more importantly was they were willing to come into Philadelphia recognizing that they needed to be a partner. This was not going to be State College. This was not going to be, the world was not going to revolve around Penn State when they came to Philadelphia. And they were going to need to find ways to work with some of the other academic institutions so that they would be welcomed as a honest partner. I think academic institutions can be good and bad at that role, and I think Penn State was particularly good. They work very well with partners at the University of Pennsylvania and at Drexel and at Temple and at Rowan and Rutgers as part of a team. And it was always about how could they add value, right? How could they bring something new to the table that would contribute meaningfully to partnership? And I think partnership's essential to all of that, and we've all been in partnerships that are good, and we've been in partnerships that are bad. And I think the best partnerships are when the partners all contribute something of unique value and then take something of unique value back. And I think that's where Penn State really came and continues to come. I would have said we're, kind of the saying of, we're at the end of the beginning in terms of really defining the opportunities that exist not only for Penn State, but for research partnerships and education partnerships being an integral part of a comprehensive economic development strategy.
And I think you're so right that there's so much that has evolved over the number of years that you've been involved in the Navy Yard, and how much that has added to the depth of the Penn State architectural engineering education. There's one element I want to explore too, which I think is really important, is the industry partnership that enters into this. And Ted, I think with the work that you do around the design-build model is important, but I think we also would like to know, how can industry and academia be better partners to build this critical need for an innovative, highly trained workforce of design and construction professionals? Because you have a need, there's only so many students that are graduating per year. How do you fulfill, what partnerships are important to you?
I would start by saying the Penn State AE program, I think, is a very unique program in that it's really specifically geared to our industry and very responsive to the needs of the industry. We recruited a lot of schools, and I think more than any program, that certainly is built around what we do. Students coming out there have a really great breadth of the whole industry, but they also have very deep knowledge of a specific part of that industry. And I think where you see a lot of the responsiveness, the difference from when I was there till now, I see students having lots more internships, and I think that's really helpful to the education because they're coming back better prepared, or they're asking better questions, they're probably demanding more from their professors. So I think that's all the positive parts of it, but I think where we could do better is, I think maybe on the research side, because I look at our industry and we're certainly not lacking problems and challenges, and I think when you look out there, it's a very fragmented industry. So when I think about taking on these challenges, a lot of times a single company can't take these on. It's just, these are big issues. Where I could see the industry and academia joining together is, I think a place like Penn State could try to take on some of these issues and combine the resources of a lot of different companies that, again, are facing all the same challenges and really working together. When you and I talked, Karen, before this, we had discussion and said we're going to talk about the collaborations between our companies and Penn State and academia, and I got a little nervous because, like, oh my God, I'm a little embarrassed. We don't have a lot of that. We should have a whole lot more of that. And again, it's great that the students have employers and there's that interaction, but there's something that should be beyond that. And again, I think it's on the research side. This is an industry that it does have a lot of issues and challenges that I think Penn State and universities could really help with.
Thank you, and I agree. I think there's a lot of opportunity that our industry partners could have. I see some of that starting to evolve with like the things like the Learning Factory at Penn State, where there are, you know, industry partners that come in and students are solving real life issues. But again, it's at the insular level in State College in a laboratory on campus, and it's very limited as far as how they can go and what they can do. So I think expanding that to a venue like the Navy Yard is really key. And I want to go back to something that you said just in your discussion about mentorship and apprenticeships. Martha, we talked about that in the educational vein and how important having that pipeline is and how early you have to start building that pipeline. And I thought that was very interesting, some of your comments that you made during our discussion. Would you elaborate on that for our audience?
Well, one thing that, you know, we are increasingly looking to the research universities, to the Penn States and others to do is to really help solve one of the big problems in the education sector, which is the under-preparation of young people. And the loss, in my view, you know, I'm in my 60s, the loss of a work ethic that our generation grew up with. And so there are lots of reasons for that. And we have a body of research now that says mentors and internships and tutors and people who really know their craft, that take an interest in young people, can build whether you call it an ecosystem or a pipeline. I've always called it a pipeline, but can build a much better prepared pipeline from the early years on up through, and hopefully through college and even into advanced degrees like you have and so forth. We have tremendous need. We only have 15% of undergraduates in the science and technology fields. We have thousands of jobs that aren't filled by the students here who live in Pennsylvania. They live in this country because they're not prepared enough. And so when you have a model like Penn State, where you have well-prepared graduates, what you want to do is replicate and scale. And to do that, you simply have to have a basis of relationship with the industry partners, and you have to have government. And so when you finish a recession, and we've had goodness knows how many years of taking money out of Pennsylvania and the rest of the country, on average nationally, it's 20%. Pennsylvania had a much bigger challenge in its public universities. We have to build back something that is going to build this pipeline all the way through. And so you need the research and you need the knowledge, but you also, with a program like this and faculty like this, imagination, as Einstein said, is more than knowledge. Knowledge has to be a given, but we've got to have graduates with imagination to tackle the problems that you talked about and the things that we saw up on the screen.
Yeah, John?
I think that's a really important point, and I think Chimay talked about one of the strengths of this program that that's being honored tonight is this notion of multidisciplinary approach to education. Right, and it's not just about multidisciplinary within engineering, but you have to learn about economics and you have to learn about policy and regulation. And I think when you talk about the built environment in particular, so we think about this industry, I think about multidisciplinary approaches to problems. And we have approaches around energy efficiency. So Penn State's work at the Navy Yard with their Consortium for Building Energy Innovation, which is a Department of Energy initiative, is really focused on this idea of what are the diverse set of actions that impact on that built environment, and who's going to sort through them. Some of them are engineering and design issues, some of them are economic issues, some of them are issues about policy, some of them are issues about workforce. So we can design the best, most efficient, smartest buildings imaginable to man. And then if we put somebody in that building with a high school degree and they can't operate it, what's going to happen? Right? And so I think that notion of universities are the places where we see the potential and the need for cross-disciplinary approaches to problem solving. And I think sometimes it can be hard in everybody's life to kind of get out of your own silo, but universities have this opportunity to bring together. And I think the built environment is a perfect example of an industry that could benefit from and needs those kinds of solutions. And they're not out there. I think this consortium for building energy innovation that I mentioned, Penn State has been managing this initiative for 3 or 4 years now. And a big part of it has been really breaking down barriers. The Department of Energy funds a lot of that activity, and trying to talk to the Department of Energy about why workforce development is important in the built environment, it's not necessarily an easy discussion to have. The Department of Energy has a certain focus, and they should have a certain focus. But if we take some of these problems out of their individual territory and put them in an environment like the university environment, particularly a research university environment, we should really challenge the universities to bring that multidisciplinary approach and create new solutions.
Yeah. There's a level of complexity to all of this that I know, Chimay, that you've been involved in for so long. I mean, what advice could you give to the audience tonight on some of the things that you and John have experienced together at the Navy Yard? What worked? What, do you wish you could have done more of? Is the communication link, the fact that you're in State College in Philadelphia? What are some of the factors that work?
I think one of the most important was really that we had the freedom from the upper level administration to really do these things. And then, of course, you need the imaginative faculty to come up with the ideas. And then we also needed to have brilliant students who are willing to engage at various levels. And I think that's one of the great things about the program. We didn't just, we had a commencement speaker a few years ago, and he said engineers typically come in two forms. There's the extrovert and the introvert. And the extrovert is the one that looks at your feet when he's talking to you. And so one of the things we are proud of is that our students don't turn out this way.
It's a great option, and most kids today aren't being pushed that direction. So the people we end up in trades often happen to be legacy kids. Their dad was in the union, so they got in the union. So you don't have a huge motivated workforce. And since we self-perform work, it's a challenge for us. So we don't talk a lot about that. We're talking about the engineers and professional trades, but down at the tradesman level, there's going to be a severe shortage of qualified people.
That's where I think we need to just think about the whole pipeline. So you may go into a trade right out of a 2-year program or a 1-year program, but what are you going to do in 10 or 15 years? And so that's where Penn State and the pipeline has to really connect, because I think students are going to have greater and greater, more breadth and more depth. And I don't know that when I think about the future, and I don't know that people will be an electrician or a construction, to be in a construction trade on a job. The head of our, I had 6 unions for all these years, and the head of the building and trades union guy always used to talk to me about what am I going to do with these people who can't go on, who can't do the physical work anymore. And I said, well, why can't they be the construction managers? Why can't we do a pipeline where you've got different levels of the job? So if they have to work in a hard trade and really, technical skills, they may do that for 5, 10, 15 years, maybe not 30 anymore. So I just think we have to rethink it. Yeah.
Well, and there are places for them. Obviously, the better people are moving up to field management. Those real management positions. So they're working on a CAD machine doing building modeling.
Then they need business. Then they need all the other skills.
Yeah, and they're picking up it over time. But you're right. It's tough on a body to work 30, 40 years in a trade. But we see those people out there. Their bodies do eventually break down. It's a tough work.
The other thing I would say in response to Anthony's question about a frontier, I think in the built environment, the other frontier, and Anthony and I were talking about this a little bit, I think is around infrastructure. Right? We talk a lot about infrastructure, and we talk a lot about decaying infrastructure, and then we kind of just stop. Right? We don't push through to what are the real solutions here? What are the solutions in terms of technology? What are the solutions in terms of how we allocate resources to infrastructure? We've built up an infrastructure in this country over the last, particularly after World War II, that was not particularly rational. It was, largely from a city person's perspective, it was largely sprawling and not particularly strategic. And I think that a university like Penn State that thinks about allocation of resources and economics and policy and the environment and engineering, and how we not only design these things, but how we pay for them and how we create the systems to allocate those resources. Those are serious issues that my guess is, hopefully a politician in Washington is not going to figure that out, because I don't think that's the answer we're going to want to see. And I think that for Penn State and for universities like Penn State, that's a serious issue that has, I think a lot of hair on it and a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, hence the story yesterday about Detroit and the power outage in the city, and and I said, well, yeah, it's been happening for a long time, and here we are, and I think it's really critical. Something that you said about the flexibility in a person's education too, the ability to come in and say, I know that I want to do more hands-on work, I want to be able to do that. Is there a venue at Penn State that they can do that? Maybe it's at a branch campus in a technical program, maybe it's at Penn College, but there's got to be some way to illuminate that for kids to be able to see that earlier in their
you have a great example at Penn State. Penn College is a terrific example. So in Pennsylvania right now, we have a significant amount of activity around shale gas, right? And you can sort of put aside the discussion if you want about fracking. But the reality is Penn College is on the ground training kids coming out of school to be technicians and people in the field who are working their way into a career path and solving those problems on the ground. And that's in a bit of a, I would say, reactive way, right, to this opportunity. But that something like Penn College and its reach back to a different population is critical to these kinds of issues.
I'm glad that John brought up the issue of infrastructure, because increasingly one of the frontiers that I often talked about, and Anthony may remember this, is this whole area of systems. We are currently within AE trying to train our graduates to understand buildings as a system of systems. And then you then need to go beyond the individual building to look at collections of buildings. How are they connected to the utilities, and how are they connected to transportation systems, and beyond that. And so you then start to look at city-scale systems. And we're beginning to have conversations. I've had a number of workshops at the Navy Yard where we're bringing the utilities together to figure out what is the interconnectedness between all of these infrastructure systems. It's too late to start to figure this out when there's a disaster like Sandy. You really need to be more proactive, and as we renew and rejuvenate some of these infrastructure systems, we need to look at these connectivities and try to make sure that those interdependencies are figured out. And again, not just with the infrastructure itself, but how does that affect the food supply and a whole range of other things. And there really is no single organization that's looking at this. And so we need to have what we kind of tend to refer to as joined up thinking in terms of how do we manage these huge systems of systems to make sure that in cases of disaster or failures, the system is resilient enough to cope, but more importantly that we mitigate ahead of time the potential impact of these sorts of disasters. So within AE, we're trying to do that at a small level with buildings, but we're increasingly using opportunities such as what we have at the Navy Yard to kind of broaden that idea.
We probably have time for another question. Peter?
First of all, my compliments to Penn State, because with all the 80 graduates that are working for the company today, it appears to me that they're more prepared than some of the other colleges and universities that we deal with. And there seems to be a lot of shepherding going on with the student prior to them becoming employed. But I have and I think that Penn State's been able to distinguish themselves from other universities in that fashion. So I asked the question, and I don't know who to ask this question of, but the building market itself is worth about $600 billion a year. It's the largest building market on the planet. It's been the largest building market on the planet for over 50 years. But the United States still graduates only 65,000 engineers, and 2 of every 10 are women. So I have to ask the question, will we see a material change in the numbers of engineers in the next 5 to 10 years? And will we ever break 20% when it comes to women engineers in our building business?
Yes, thank you. And let me just tell you from what I see from the Penn State perspective, they had started the engineering ambassadors probably 5 or 6 years ago in the Department of Mechanical Engineering, because civil and architectural engineering is probably around 20% or over 20%, above 20%. But when you get to mechanical and electrical, it's very low. And so the engineering ambassadors are students that go out and they can only go to so many regional schools. But the idea is they get to what Martha and I have been talking about, the students that are in grade school, and inspire them to be an engineer, not because, okay, now once you get through Physics 201 and electrical, blah, blah, blah. No, it's we solve the world's problems. We make a difference. Did you realize that we took a study of shark skin, and that is how we have implemented the technology into medical equipment and materials that are used in buildings for making sterile environments. And these kids are just blown away. I was blown away as an alum seeing this because you don't really think of it in that perspective. As engineers, we solve the world's problems. And I think if more women and minorities knew and really knew that they could be shepherded through. We have a mentoring program in all of the engineering departments now that are filled with alums that take the time to one-on-one mentor students. And then in AE, there's a student-to-student mentoring program that all helps. But you've got to get the word out, and you've got to get it out early enough. And Martha, you'd made a comment about in 3rd grade that's when there's this.
There's a lot of research of Eleanor Duckworth and others who's at University of Pennsylvania, just talking about kids from lower income families, sort of the bottom sectors, losing hope in very early grades because they haven't been inspired and because they don't have the family infrastructure that I think many of us probably were fortunate enough to have. So, how can we look to the universities like Penn State to say, how can we cross these boundaries, go across maybe to the schools of social welfare and others to kind of figure this out so these kids can have great learning experiences as early as possible. And I know there's a group called the Maker Fair, and the Maker Fair goes all around, just giving kids hands-on experience. I mean, really, if you want to, I don't want to get into the weeds, but we have kids that that are just put in front of a TV set. I mean, the average American is watching TV hours a day, like more than 5 hours a day. And imagine what we could do to just inspire the next generation, to make things, to be outside, to look at the interior of these great buildings in the center at the Navy Yard. And that's why when you're saying, 11,000 people going in and out of there, that's where we need to get kids to do that with adults at all levels.
And I do think, as a non-engineer, I think that there is a certain intimidating element to engineering for kids. And I think there's a certain element that if you're not good in math and science, you're kind of self-selected out, right? And finding ways to kind of express more broadly the notion of problem solving and how we can develop kids to think, because that kid maybe is going to end up as a carpenter in an apprentice program. Or maybe she's going to end up as an engineer with a PhD. But I think it's about sort of demystifying this notion of science and math and making it practical. I have young kids, and I have a 10-year-old son. I'm not an engineer, and I was intimidated out early on by math and science. But I have a 10-year-old who loves Legos, and he kind of got hooked on Legos, and I was watching him do this for a while, and Legos are different than what I remember, right? So he goes and we buy him a box of like 3,000 pieces of Legos, and they come with instructions, and he follows the instructions and puts stuff together. And I'm like, that's great. I would never have the patience to do that. I went and bought him a big giant bin of Legos and said, now just make something, right? And I think that notion of just trying to encourage kids to think about how we take things and solve problems, and not worry when they're in 3rd grade about math and science, right? And just think about problem solving and what that develops into.
And I think the other side of the equation is on the faculty and the capacity that the engineering schools currently have, Chimay. I mean, we've talked about this many a time. That's another limiting factor to a certain extent.
Yeah, it is a big limiting factor. When I came to Penn State, I always had the notion that we were the constriction in the middle. We had a huge number of students wanting to get into the program. We're enrollment controlled. We can only take 100 students per year. And then at our career fair, we have 150 companies wanting to hire the graduates. And so we are the constriction in the middle, but we can't take on any more because we don't want to dilute the quality. And so we need to grow the faculty, we need to grow the facilities, and then we can start to expand and take on a whole lot more.
I can attest to that.
Yeah.
We try to hire Penn State AEs, and it's hard. You have to get in early. You better hire an intern after their sophomore, junior year, and then keep them with your company. If you wait till they're seniors, the demand for the AE students is ridiculous. It's hard to compete.
So at our career fair this year, for example, we had 95 to 100 graduates. We had 130 companies that we were able to get in. We had another 50 on the waiting list. And so the demand is there, and it's really, we need to invest in new faculty, we need to invest in the facilities. And with regard to diversity, I think we are doing reasonably well. There's certainly scope for improvement, and we are trying to grow that. We have almost double the number of female faculty in the department, and so a lot of the young females coming in have role models. Over the last 5 years, we've had, I think, 3 out of the 5 outstanding alumni have been female. And I think, again, that's critically important for getting the female students to have role models that they can look up to. And again, that helps them to demystify the potential role of women in engineering. And so we're trying to do things along those lines.
Well, I think that we have run out of time, but I would like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for all of your wonderful insights and input tonight. I hope that all of you out there are able to take away the inspiration and maybe some ideas for carrying this forward, because the intent of tonight was to start the discussion. It's up to all of you, including you students out there, to make a difference and to really encourage others to go into the field of engineering. There is so much more to do. This has evolved, and this is such a great night, but there is a lot more that we can do. And so I wanted to wrap up with a quote from Henry Ford that said, "Coming together is the beginning. Staying together is progress. Working together, that's success." And I would like to thank you all for being here tonight, because it's truly a pleasure and an honor, and working together has truly been a success. Thank you.
Thank you very much.